A meeting should only exist if the purpose is to decide, debate, discuss, or develop yourself or your team. We as humans, we associate visibility with value. We associate presence with productivity. People start to associate a packed calendar with importance. There's nothing, that signals you're more important than everyone else than having a double booked meeting.
Just how bad are meetings really? You've got some great data on this.
They're really bad. And when we think about upwards of 40% of managers are rating their meetings as unproductive, the cost is enormous. Meetings in the US alone equate to more than $1.4 trillion each year, more than 5% of GDP. It's an enormous cost, and it's an enormous cost not just in terms of, the salary cost, the time cost, but also
there is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone.
Welcome to the conversation and to the beginning of 2026. So today we're talking about meetings. I know, meetings take an enormous amount of time and often with what seems like an incredibly small amount of reward. Too many of these meetings create more overload. They create stress. You don't have time to think. You've got long hours to make up for the work that you didn't get done because of the meetings. And there's the actions that you have to take coming out of the meetings in addition. So there has to be a better way to do what we know we need to do in organizations, which is coordinate and collaborate. So today, actually, there is a better way. And we're going to talk about some very tactical advice that you can do to make your meetings fit for purpose, time efficient, and a joy rather than a hassle. And if you think that's an impossible task, stay tuned because I think we're going to achieve it. My guest is Rebecca Hinds. Rebecca is a leading expert on organizational behavior and a future of work specialist. She founded the Work Innovation Lab at Asana and the Work AI Institute at Glean, all first of their kind think tanks dedicated to this cutting edge research on the future of work. She's featured in all the top tier publications and in all the top tier podcasts, by the way, as well. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fast Company, Wired, and the list goes on. A lot of corporate speaking engagements, a lot of webinars, and she's a trusted advisor to organizations navigating the challenges of modern work, from meeting overload, hybrid dysfunction, to the messy realities of AI adoption and organizational change. The book we're talking about today, Your Best Meeting Ever, 7 Principles for Designing Meetings That Get Things Done. Sounds good to me. Rebecca, welcome to the conversation.
Wanda, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it.
I am too. So set us off. I know from talking to my coaching clients, and I think everybody listening knows that they think their meetings are bad. Just how bad are meetings really? You've got some great data on this.
Oh, they're really bad. And when we think about, how many meetings are dysfunctional, we know that upwards of 40% of managers are rating their meetings as unproductive. The cost is enormous. My good friend, Elise Keith, has done research to suggest that meetings in the US alone equate to more than $1.4 trillion, more than each year, more than 5% of GDP. It's an enormous cost, and it's an enormous cost not just in terms of, the salary cost, the time cost, but also the cost on our focus and sanity and well-being. We also know that meetings are highly correlated to employee engagement within the organization. There's nothing more important than coordination and collaboration at work. And so the premise of Your Best Meeting Ever is we need to treat meetings as a product because they're both the most important and most expensive product in our organization, and they're the most dysfunctional.
All right. So the most important product in the organization and the most expensive product in our organization. That is an interesting phrase. And I love your quote. In the US alone, forget the rest of the world for just a moment, $1.4 trillion expended on meetings. And that doesn't account for the stress that comes out of that and the lack of attention and lack of focus. More than 5% of the GDP. Wow. Wow, that should get attention, especially when we rate meetings and say, was it worth it? So do you have any data on how people feel about all these meetings?
It should, and when we think about the juxtaposition too, in terms of as organizations, as leaders, we tend to be quite data oriented. We certainly, for any other business process, we measure everything down to the decimal point, and yet for some reason, and there are lots of reasons, we close our eyes, we cross our fingers, and we surrender to bad meetings. And so often when I go into organizations, it's about 50% of meetings that employees are rating as dysfunctional. There are vast differences, culture to culture, organization to organization, but typically, I'm never surprised to see about 50% of meetings rated as dysfunctional. That's what I've seen in on average most organizations.
Okay, $1.4 trillion expended in meetings in the US alone every year at a minimum. And 50% of that is largely a waste.
Mm-hmm. And the calculations are hard. But yes, and when we think about the cost of employee time, it's massive in our organizations. We spend, meetings are the activity we spend most of our time on, and yet consistently they're, funneling into this activity that's unproductive, such that we know also the time we spend in unproductive meetings has increased significantly through the pandemic. And now what we're seeing is managers are spending about 5 hours per week in unproductive meetings consistently, now more than any other group within the organization, because they feel it in so many different directions.
Right. I see it as very disheartening. So you said at the beginning, the coordination and collaboration drive engagement. And I hear every day people say, I can't stand this organization, or I don't like work, or I feel defeated because of the dysfunctional meetings, the meeting to meet, or the meeting to check and check and check. All sorts of reasons, but it just feels like I'm stuck in sludge, is what I hear.
Exactly, Wanda. And what we're seeing too is increasingly the employee experience. We've known forever that the employee experience matters for so many different reasons, obviously for retention, but performance as well. Increasingly, the employee experience is becoming a digital employee experience. And increasingly, we're seeing employees overwhelmed, exhausted. My colleague Paul Leonardi calls it digitally exhausted by the tools they feel they need to use at work, including meeting, Zoom, WebEx, Teams. Often you have more than one meeting technology. And we're needing to think much more thoughtfully about the digital employee experience as a driver of well-being and productivity, because you're absolutely right. If employees don't have the right tools to communicate, coordinate, collaborate, that affects every aspect of their work.
Right. All right. Managers on average spending 5 hours a week in unproductive meetings. I would bet for many of my clients, it's double that. That's an average.
It's an average. It's an average for sure. And this was 2024. So what we're also seeing is, in many ways, AI is making things worse. Managers, it's 5.8 hours, so round up to 6. But it's very difficult, and I talk about this in your best meeting ever as well. It's very difficult to measure our meetings because we have this knee-jerk reaction to assume meetings are bad. Often they are bad, but we've also been socially conditioned to believe they're bad. And this is why often you can't just reliably go into an organization and ask people, how effective are your meetings? You really need to dive into specific meetings. I recommend asking about time in particular. Was this meeting worth your time? Was it a good investment of your time? Because unlike meetings where there are a whole bunch of biases, everyone has an intuitive sense of whether their time was well spent or invested, and that can sort of get you out of this false measurement that we often see associated with meetings.
Great. I want to come to the tactics, and I want to come to this, how do you take the meeting by meeting and kind of take this whole approach. But humor me for like 2 minutes. Why has this gotten so bad? What on earth has caused because it feels like it went from one, which was mediocre, to horrendous. Why?
Mm-hmm. There are so many reasons. I think it boils down to two fundamental reasons. So, one is when we think about collaboration in our organizations, collaboration is quite invisible, right? It's very hard to end a workday and know who you've collaborated with, how often, whether it was effective. It happens through so many different people, places, processes, technology. Meetings are highly visible, right? We can often have visibility into people's calendars. We can see them in the meeting room. We often see the Zoom screen. And because of that, we as humans, we associate visibility with value. We associate presence with productivity. And so what we start to see in organizations is people start to associate a packed calendar with importance. There's nothing, that signals you're more important than everyone else than having a double booked meeting, for example. And so because of that, often there's a significant lack of clarity in terms of organizations. If you ask employees, what are you responsible for? What are our company's goals? Very few employees can make that assessment with any degree of confidence. Meetings are a way to do something performatively in a way that signals you've been productive. Regardless of anything happening in the meeting, at least you've sat in the meeting, you have it on your calendar as proof, it signals productivity. And so when there is that lack of uncertainty, when there's uncertainty, meetings become a reliable way to demonstrate you've done something. And so that's one of the reasons. The other big one is there are these weird psychological pressures associated with meetings, such that when someone schedules a meeting on our calendar, we feel a need to reciprocate. We feel a need to accept. If we think about the words, it's a meeting invitation. We accept it or we reject it. Those are very socially loaded words where we start to feel like canceling a meeting is not just canceling the meeting. We're canceling in many ways the person who has scheduled the meeting. We worry about hurt feelings. And so because also of this social conditioning, we're inclined to leave meetings on our calendar. We're inclined to resist canceling the meetings even when they're not worth our time.
Right. Or when we don't add additional value. I mean, people get added to meetings just so you know it's happening, and then you feel like you need to go, and then you go, and then it's a never-ending cycle there as well. I also see managers needing to know the status of things, what's happening. And so the fastest way to get a status update is to coordinate a meeting. And you tend to throw everybody in that so everybody is informed. It seems like a coordination effort. But you don't stop to say, what's the cost of this? Is it the most efficient? Is there a better system, a better process that gives the manager what they legitimately need to know? All right, fair enough. All right, let's dig into how, because this is it's too important. You got my attention. I want to know how. So you advocate this whole systems approach. What do you mean, and what does that actually look like?
And this is a really important component of how we think about meetings. Is just as we would think about a product. Apple is the classic example where our Mac works with our iPhone, works with our AirPods. Everything is connected. The same should be true with our meetings. And what I find is often in organizations, meetings are blamed for everything that's wrong with work. Usually they're a symptom of a bigger problem, and that is a broken communication system. And so the first thing you should have as an organization is clarity for employees. Every employee should be able to say what deserves to be a meeting in this organization versus what deserves to flow through Slack versus an email. It's such a simple activity, and I encourage folks to do it. Ask 4 of your employees, what deserves to be a meeting in this organization? You shouldn't get more than one different answer. And as we've talked about, if there's not that clarity, people start to default to meetings because they have this visibility bias in a way that, that's how we get status updates overwhelmingly happening in meetings when really they should be happening in other communication channels.
Yeah. Well, and partly we have so many communication channels, and I find we don't know which one to use for which purpose. So we double, triple, quadruple up, compounding the problems and the complexity and the blah, blah, blah. So clarity would be really useful. Like, when do I send an email? When do I do a phone call? When do I do a meeting? When do I do a Slack? When do I do a who knows, whatever else it is in your organization.
Exactly. And we saw this through the pandemic, right? We had more digital tools than ever before. What employees didn't have clarity in terms of what actually are we using these tools for? And when communication lives in 5 different places, it lives nowhere, and meetings become that reliable way, the highly inefficient but reliable way to, figure out what's happening and how to move things forward.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That makes a ton of sense for me. So we need clarity, you said, Rebecca. Clarity on what deserves a meeting, what deserves Slack, wherever. Do you have advice on how to get that kind of clarity?
Yes, and it starts with the meeting, right? The most critical part of all of this is what actually deserves to be a meeting. So I like to use a test I call the 4D CEO test. So it's a 2-part test to decide whether you actually need that meeting. So the first test is the 4D test. A meeting should only exist if the purpose is to decide, debate, discuss, or develop yourself or your team. Even if a meeting passes that 4D test, it still needs to pass the second CEO test. Is a meeting complex? So that's the C. Is there enough unknowns? Is there enough ambiguity where it is going to be most efficient to bring everyone together synchronously in a meeting? E, is it emotionally intense? So are you needing to display emotions, read emotions? Are you trying to persuade someone, give them tough feedback? In these cases, it's not just about facts, it's about feeling, showing up with your human empathy, reading body language, very important. Or is it a O, decision? Is it a one-way door decision? This comes from Amazon. One-way door decisions are decisions where once you walk through the door, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to walk back the other way. In those cases, the cost of misalignment is too high not to get everyone in a room for 15 minutes in a line. So when we think about status updates, right, status updates are essentially information exchange. They don't even pass the first 4D test. Boss briefings are another one I see all the time, doesn't pass the 4D test. Even something like brainstorming doesn't necessarily pass the test. And this rule helps us become much more disciplined about using meetings as a last resort, a very important last resort, but one that is not intended to be a catch-all for everything.
Okay. All right. I'm coming back to the 2 comments you said. Brainstorming doesn't qualify. Interesting. And 2, status updates, information exchange don't qualify. I'm coming back to that one. But to repeat, you said, first, it needs to pass the 4D test, which is we either need to be deciding, debating, discussing, or developing. And developing could be an idea or a person or a skill. So all of those are reasons to meet. And then, in addition, it needs to be complex, meaning there's a good bit of ambiguity. E, it needs to be emotional so that we have to deal with not just the facts, but also how people are feeling about it. And O, it needs to be a decision that is a one-way door, meaning it is hard to wind back from it or regroup from it once we've made that decision. So the cost then of alignment is worthwhile. I like those tests. Mm-hmm. And so do you advocate? Yeah.
The CEO test, it's one of those 3. So it should be passing the CE or the O.
Okay.
Or
multiple. 3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And the first 4 are also the same thing. All right. So now talk to me about what to do then with status updates, information exchange. I mean, there are tons of meetings that are often a thing called a Monday morning meeting where a whole bunch of people get together and it's a sort of, what are you planning? What do you got on your plate? What's happening? Where do you need help? Blah, blah, blah. What do we do with those kind of meetings if we're not meeting?
So those, unless they pass, and sometimes they do pass, you have a blocker on your plate, you can't move forward without, it's a complex project, you need that manager weighing in or your colleague weighing in. But often status updates, the agendas are repeated from the last status update, it's information exchange, that should all be happening asynchronously. So organizations, can use Slack, some use email, some use, ideally it's a work management software. I spent many years working at Asana where, the more you're able to see who's responsible for what the deadlines are, what are the dependencies, that enables you to conduct status updates much more quickly. But that should all be happening asynchronously. And, now AI, one of the best use cases for AI is to help you with those status updates such that you're no longer also needing to spend as much time on the Monday or the Friday creating the status update.
There's old technology, old processes, rather, I should say, that precede Asana. And Asana has now picked this up. So have other practices. But just that basic, get in the habit of a Friday afternoon sending a checklist. Here's where I got to. Here's what's up next. Here's what I'm blocked on. And if that goes in some sort of group discussion format, so it's not a string of weird emails, it's a very quick scan to know what I need to know from my colleagues way more efficiently than getting a bunch of people in a meeting.
Exactly.
All at one time.
Mm-hmm. And transparency, what we see in healthy organizations, and healthy meeting organizations, they have strong written communication cultures. They're doing the status updates with clarity in writing and transparently. So even if, you're on the marketing team, having a way to see the visibility in terms of what are those status updates from the product team. So I know, the product pipeline that's coming in the roadmap, that's also really important in allowing us to spend less time and rely less on meetings.
Right. Right. And the payoff for a manager is if you get your team doing this, it takes less of your time. I think that's the part everybody has to be focused on.
Yes. And I think even more important, it enables you as a manager to spend that meeting time. We know that nothing is more important, and there's quite a bit of research to suggest this as well. There's nothing more important than that one-on-one meeting between the direct report and the manager. Spend more of that time on the human aspects, the complexities, the roadblocks, the things that absolutely need your experience, judgment, and camaraderie as a manager and leader.
Okay, so repeat. 4 Ds: decide, debate, discuss, develop, or don't meet. And 3 Cs: complex, meaning ambiguous; emotional, meaning lots, it's not just the facts; or it's a one-way door, meaning we can't rewind that decision easily or step back from it if we need to. Other than that, find another means. And I've also been an advocate of lots of times you find managers who say, I just was in a senior level meeting and I learned X, Y, and Z, and I need to tell the team about this. So we gather a meeting for me to tell the team. Of course, it takes 2 weeks for me to get that scheduled, by which the information is outdated, blah, blah, blah. I still contend one of the smartest things, just record a voice memo. Send a voice memo. Faster. I mean, and there's a ton of AI ways of making that easy, efficient, but so much smarter.
Yeah. Or, if you're in an organization where meetings are recorded by default, send the full recording. And that way employees can, rewind the parts that really do matter, fast forward, watch at 3 times speed, and they're not requiring to be in a meeting.
One of my coaching clients says that there's a particular senior leader that she meets with that has 1,001 ideas. And with permission from that senior leader, she puts the phone down and presses record. Nobody in the room needs to know that's what's happening, but that is what she does. And then she turns that into an AI generated summary, which is both helpful for her team, and helpful for everybody else who was in that meeting, by the way. What a great use. Not perfect, but much better than where we were before.
And consent is really important as well. We want to make sure that when we're recording, we're clear on, what folks have consented to. There's nothing more frustrating or legally compromising than not doing that. But absolutely, the more we can record and people are bought into the purpose of that, the more we're going to be able to use fewer meetings.
Use fewer meetings. Okay. All right, so we've got this holistic approach. Now, I got to come back to one. You said brainstorming doesn't qualify. Why not?
So the research here is overwhelming in terms of, we often think that brainstorming should happen in a live setting. We picture the whiteboard, we picture the sticky notes flying around. The research is overwhelming. People brainstorm more ideas and more original ones when they do so independently rather than in a group setting. And a big reason for that is groupthink, right? As soon as someone says something in the meeting, especially if it's a powerful person or person who has more status and power than us in an organization, we start to subconsciously or sometimes fully consciously orienting our contributions around that contribution of the more powerful person. And so independent brainstorming helps to get out of some of that groupthink. Now, once we've brainstormed independently and we're ready to discuss our ideas or debate them, now we've crossed into the 4D territory, and a meeting can be helpful and generative. But that early stage brainstorming, I see it all the time where leaders will call a brainstorm meeting. They haven't given any context. People, have nowhere to start. They're trying to performatively share ideas that they know aren't that good, and you're all of a sudden biased by whoever. Often the leader comes in with their own agenda and wanting to lead the conversation in a certain direction, and it's not a good outcome if you're strictly talking about brainstorming and idea generation.
Right. I find that there's some value in playing off of each other's ideas, but I also find that that is better done asynchronously than in a meeting, because I can read the ideas and go, oh, wait, that sparks blah, 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 blah. And I'm not influenced by the power positions or anything else in the room. I've got time and I can do it in my own way. If I'm a more introverted thinker, I need space for that.
Mm-hmm. And we see this especially with different learning styles and contribution styles and personalities, where giving everyone a level playing field. Of course, there are, some very powerful, important use cases for that spontaneous dynamic in communication, but we're thinking brainstorming and brainstorming with a purpose. Often you want much of that to happen asynchronously.
Right. I can see that one. I see that one really, really well. Okay, so we've got this holistic systematic approach, which starts with understanding what deserves a meeting and what other communication channels do we use and how we do it. And we've got our 4D CEO test. So we know, does it meet the quality for having a meeting? Okay, now I go through my calendar and I figure out that 65% of the meetings that I have on my calendar don't seem to meet the quality to me. What do I do now?
So there are a few different tactics. My favorite strategy, and one that I just consistently see surpass others, is what I call a meeting doomsday. So if you know your calendar is a mess, half your meetings are dysfunctional, unproductive, probably it's more than that. Probably it's more than what you think. Clearing the slate, and this is especially valuable at the start of a year, clearing the slate and starting fresh, rebuilding your calendar. So a meeting doomsday is essentially a 48-hour cleanse. You delete your recurring meetings for 48 hours and then re-add meetings back to your calendar, but every meeting needs to earn its way back. The meetings that are no longer valuable, they stay off the calendar. And the meetings that have some value, they're redesigned to be most valuable. So in terms of shortening the length, removing some attendees, now removing the AI note takers that have started to replace the humans, the agenda items, the cadence of the meeting, thinking about across those 4 dimensions in particular, how can we redesign, rewire the meetings that have some value but still can be improved?
Okay. All right. So I do a 48-hour cleanse, meaning every standing meeting on my calendar is gone. Presumably people don't need to put in a bunch of ad hoc meetings to fill in the gap. We're just going to have a 48-hour blank. And then meetings earn their way back in. All right. So somebody sends me a meeting invitation and I need to get out of my psyche that says I need to be kind, nice, and accept. And I would ask for clarification or why or a challenge, or what do I do?
Yes, and ideally this is done at a team level for sure. It's not going to be incredibly productive if it's an individual, because our meetings are interdependent on other people. And what this does, if you do it at the team level, the department level, or the organizational level, is it gives people a built-in excuse to delete those meetings where they feel like they're going to insult or hurt another person's feelings from canceling them. And so it can be enormously productive. And I've seen this, time and time again, where you're able to use the doomsday as an excuse to cancel that meeting that is unproductive. And if everyone's on the level playing field, you're able to do that collectively.
Right. And then we're going to spend some time, obviously it takes time, to decide what needs to go back in and why, and then how to structure it. But that time is well spent as opposed to the hours that we're investing in meetings. Okay. Let's talk about the redesign for a minute. So you said several things to consider: shorten the length of time, number of people, the agenda, the cadence. Talk to me about what are the kind of questions we should be asking as we redesign.
So if we take length, for example, we know that meetings suffer from what's called Parkinson's law, meaning time will expand to fill the time allotted. So if we give a meeting 30 minutes, it's probably going to take 30 minutes. A good gut check is take a look at your calendar and look at how many meetings are either 30 minutes or 60 minutes. And if it's the vast majority or all of them, it's a sign you haven't intentionally designed the meeting for the purpose and the objectives. And so often I'll encourage organizations, employees to start by cutting the meeting in half. My colleagues, Bob Sutton and Leidy Klotz, call this the rule of halves, right? Take that 30-minute meeting, shorten it to 15 minutes. You might cut too deep, but that's the only real way we are able to make a good judgment in terms of what's actually worth it and what's just the dead weight. There are lots of other strategies. Standing up in meetings. We know that standing meetings can run about 25% shorter than sitting down ones. We also know that unconventional meeting lengths can be very effective. I studied an individual who ran 27-minute meetings because that starts to jolt people out of autopilot. They start to think, oh, wow, this meeting has been intentionally designed. Why is it 27 minutes and not 26 or 28 minutes? And people start to take the meeting more seriously. And so it's always a toolkit depending on what your specific situation is, but thinking about length as one mechanism, whether it's trying to cut by 3 minutes or cut in half, can be one way to contribute to a more effective meeting culture and calendar.
All right. To make that work, though, that means that I have to be really clear what we're meeting about.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which means I have to have a focused content. And that also means we're not having somebody presenting in advance, because that's information exchange. It's not your 4D test.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the agenda is very important in this redesign as well. What's fascinating, Wanda, about agendas, and this is research that my good colleague Stephen Rogelberg has done, there's actually no concrete evidence to show that having an agenda improves the effectiveness of our meeting. And that is because it's not just about having the agenda. And often what we see is agendas are used in this very performative way where we think that just having an agenda is going to check the box. It makes us look prepared, productive. That's often not the case because agenda items are just this laundry list of topics that we want to get through. And so thinking about strategically, we know that the first item on an agenda matters a lot. It's disproportionately going to take the most time. We know that if there's a trivial item on the agenda, that's disproportionately going to take more time as well. And so, don't put the weekend update, on the agenda. Don't put discuss the font size on the agenda. Think about what are those high stakes topics we need to include. And then my favorite strategy is every agenda item should be framed as a combination of a verb and a noun. And what that does is the verb encourages you to think about what is that action, what is that verb that we need to be achieving in the meeting. So instead of saying something like, or including something like budget discussion or team discussion, convert it to something like approve the Q3 budget or finalize something. where you're being specific in terms of what actually needs to be done. And that does a couple things. Most importantly, it ensures that you're meeting intentionally to move work forward and get things done. It eliminates that meandering and detouring that often happens in meetings, and it allows you to understand when you can move on to the next agenda item. And so again, you remove some of that bias in terms of over-indexing on the first agenda item.
All right, I have two comments about this one. One, if I'm putting a verb in, presumably I'm putting one of the 4 Ds or a synonym: decide, discuss, debate, or develop, okay? Because if that's not there, then it's not an agenda item meeting. All right, 2. Number 2, when I work with teams and for the purposes of getting them to have better debate, so debate where we disagree, where there is emotion at stake, where we're really talking about the stuff that matters, the most effective technique I ever teach them to use is to frame the question in advance. So that it's not just the topic, it's the question we want to debate. Like, do we invest in a further Asian office or not? Or how does everybody feel about the growth of this product? There's the thing there that has real opinions, and that now becomes a verb and a noun. We're going to discuss or debate this topic, and here's the question. But it's the framing of the question that makes the discussion effective.
I think that's brilliant. The other strategy that I think pairs well with this is ensure that everyone knows what you're optimizing for. And that often is what I see. Meetings can go down rabbit holes where each person might be correct and be, stating something that's true and helpful. But if you don't know what you're optimizing for, if you don't know, what you're optimizing for in terms of expanding to Asia, are you optimizing for revenue? Are you optimizing for customer experience? Are you optimizing for, a new product launch? You're going to get, into this hole of different perspectives that still are very valid, but you're not going to align on, that clarity in terms of what actually are we trying to achieve and optimize for.
Right. Well, and one of the most effective techniques, I'm glad you say that, because one of the most effective techniques, or most important techniques for dealing with conflict within a team is for everybody to state their intention. So what is it I am intending to accomplish in this thing that I'm putting forward? And when I know that, I know what you're optimizing for. And it doesn't make it right or wrong. It just helps me understand where you're coming from. So really useful, very, very useful. Okay, so we've got a length where you've given us some techniques like cut in half, stand up, make it in unconventional time. We've got agenda items. And it's not so much that you have to have an agenda, because sometimes you want an unstructured discussion, and there isn't really an agenda coming out of that, okay? But I have a very specific reason for meeting that meets my 4D test. And I've got a verb and a noun and maybe a question and maybe an optimization framed around that, so people have more than just the topic sentence.
Mm-hmm. And even if they're, you're very right. Not every meeting deserves to have an agenda or should have an agenda. Every attendee should have a clear purpose regardless. And so as we're thinking about the attendees, now both human and AI, each person should have a specific role to play. No two roles should be identical, and they should absolutely all be stakeholders and not just spectators or meeting tourists, as Bain will call them. In terms of that also allows you to become much more disciplined in bringing together the right people who are right to solve the specific task or problem at hand.
Yeah. This is one of my pet peeves about meetings, is that people often come to meetings because they need to know what was discussed, decided, or said. That's a status update. And way more efficient to send around a meeting summary than it is to take up all that time for everybody. And because there are a lot of bystanders, that cuts other people from actually really talking because they feel like they have to give space. It just doesn't work. So making sure that people are there because they have a stake, they have an opinion, they want to be engaged in the debate, the discussion, or whatever that goes with it. I think that's really, really important. And if not, then you got to question why they're invited in the first place. I also said it's clear that everybody understands what their role is, and we don't have competing roles. except by intention. Sometimes they're intentionally competing in other ways. All right. I love that. Now, what does that say about how many people are ideal in a meeting? Or is there a number?
There's no concrete number. In the research, there's quite a bit of alignment in terms of 7 or 8 is the maximum. Very rarely, there are exceptions, but very rarely do you want to have a meeting with more than 7 or 8 people. We start to see multitasking in particular pick up, social loafing, people become less accountable for the outcomes of the meeting. And so you should be thinking about, the fewest number of people that can accomplish the task at hand and preventing against the social loafing and multitasking that tends to happen.
Yeah. Stephen Rogelberg has some lovely research on this about how the social loafing starts to happening, or the bystanding, or I'll wait for somebody else to speak first, and all of that stuff that undercuts the 4Ds we need a meeting for at the beginning. I also find sometimes that we need more voices in the room than 7 or 8. I think this is, especially when we're getting to collaboration, there are many more people who need to have a say in it, but it doesn't mean they need to be in the meeting. It often means we need to go and consult. We need to represent them. We need to have a way of having that voice and perspective present in the meeting, but not necessarily a person present in the meeting.
That's exactly right. And a lot of that should happen before the meeting in terms of prep. One of my favorite strategies comes from Amazon, where Jeff Bezos used to leave a chair at the table empty to symbolize the customer. And I think that, having a visible reminder too, especially if it's a heated debate, this stakeholder may not be physically in the meeting, but they absolutely matter and their voice and perspective matters. That can help to, relay that in the meeting as well.
Yeah. Sometimes that can be a customer, and sometimes that can be an employee group.
Absolutely.
Any number of places along the way. Okay, fantastic. I love that one. All right. What about anything else you have to say about redesigning the meetings? Anything else we need to look at that says, how do we make this meeting designed for purpose?
I think we've covered the main ones. Frequency is another big one, right? We shouldn't be having pre-meetings and post-meetings. It should be one meeting. And in particular, we shouldn't be using a pre-meeting as, a rehearsal for a theatrical purpose that happens in the meeting. A lot of that should be happening asynchronously in a way that's transparent for everyone in the room and ensures that, you're spending time in the actual meeting on the things that deserve to be it.
Now, I'm going to challenge that, and I want you to come back at me too. So when I'm trying to persuade a group to take a particular decision, and I am spearheading that effort, I find it foolhardy that I don't know where people sit on that issue in advance to a big meeting where we're going to decide. Now, and even discuss. Because if I know, for example, that you are opposed, and I know something about why you're opposed, then I know how to represent that, how to lead that discussion. I'm prepared for it. I can address it in a constructive, much more constructive way. But I can't do that without some one-on-one conversations with you. So I'm a big believer in the one-on-one conversations in the lead up to a big meeting. But many people call that the pre-meeting and the post-meeting. How do you feel about what I've just said?
So it's so case dependent. And in this case, where your intention is to gather information, as long as it passes the 4D test and it's not something often, you want to represent your team on a topic that can be really easily understood by a simple survey or, someone submitting that asynchronously. But if you're needing to discuss debate with an employee who's especially not going to be represented in the meeting, absolutely some of that pre-meeting can be effective. The problem often is you'll have a subset of the people in the real meeting coming together before to sort of strategize and manipulate what actually happens in the meeting. Or what I see, almost as frequently, perhaps more, is after the meeting, you have a group of people come together to try to unravel the decision made in the meeting. Those are the cases where we need to be really strategic about, those pre and post ones.
Okay, but that means that we need to get the discipline in the meeting, so we say what we're really thinking in the meeting, that we get the conflict and the debate out. And I find sometimes that also means we need to have the debate in one meeting and a decision in another meeting.
Yes,
So we don't have time to work through it.
and critically, the norms around once a decision is made in the meeting, it's final. Amazon will call this disagree and commit. And I've studied organizations that, it's so hard, especially when you get to the executive leadership level, to commit to that, where they start to bake it into performance reviews and start to, make sure that folks are incentivized in the right way and recognize that it's important we live by these decisions that are made, or else what's the purpose? What's the point of having the meeting?
Okay. As a specialist also in AI and the future of work, I can't help but asking you, how do you think we should be using AI in meetings? What's good practice? What's bad practice?
The key word here is intentionality. And just as we're seeing outside meetings as well, we need to be intentional about what is the role for AI to play. So just as we would look at the human attendees, look at the role for AI to play, and that role should be very deliberate and intentional. And so when we think about meetings, there are three roles AI can play in our meetings fundamentally. First is to automate. There are so much of our meetings that involve drudgery, right? The scheduling, we know 50% of meetings are rescheduled in many cases. The double booking, the transcription, the follow-up items, all of this can be automated with AI in a way that makes sense, because AI is much better able to do those things than humans. The next role is to advise. So this is another very exciting area. Advise us on whether our meeting is effective. So help give us insight in terms of how strong our contributions are in the meeting, whether airtime is equal, whether people are multitasking. It shouldn't be about surveillance. It should be giving people more insight, more visibility into how they're showing up for meetings in a way that they themselves can course correct. The last one, both the most exciting and the most dangerous, is the AI showing up as a participant in the meeting. This is where we get into really dangerous territory, where people start to think that they can send their bots to meetings instead of showing up themselves. There are very few cases where that makes sense. There are some, but we can also think about other healthy roles for AI to play. One of those is as a devil's advocate. We talked about groupthink before. Having an AI represent the contrarian perspective can be very helpful, or the stakeholder perspective, the customer perspective. If we use AI in a way that's intentionally representing another voice, that's one of the best use cases right now in terms of this participatory role, or as a meeting moderator, especially if you have powerful people in the room, cutting them off when they're monotoning, making sure people are staying on the agenda, all of these things where often the human employee won't feel safe to share or to drive the meeting back on track. Having an AI do that can be effective as well.
Ooh, I really like that. An AI tool or something that says, you're off topic, get on back topic, or you've been talking for 5 minutes, what was the point? Or what, I can imagine all sorts of things on that one that could be incredibly useful. Plus knowing who's spoken, how frequently they've spoken. Is there a sequence in which people always speak, like someone always follows somebody else? Those really point to dysfunction in meetings, and that can be incredibly effective to figure out.
Mm-hmm. And often we have so many meetings that it's hard to know. Certainly we have a good sense of the meetings that are highly dysfunctional, but often you won't know. And in particular, when we think about gender dynamics, that's huge. We know that, women tend to contribute less. We know that meetings are much more effective when they contribute more. Having a sense of, okay, what are these distributions in our meetings? When we have the leader speak first, what's the engagement level versus when we have, a participant speak first? All of these subtle shifts matter, and they're so complex that having an AI help to advise us and potentially participate to that effect can be really helpful.
Really useful. Okay. All right. You have a couple of other things that we haven't really talked about. I just want to ask you about a couple of them. We have talked about the meeting's doomsday, but you have this concept called meeting debt. Explain that one.
So meeting debt is why we need meeting doomsday. Meeting debt, just as we would have product debt, technical debt, we all have legacy meetings on our calendars where we show up, we go through the motions week after week, month after month. Probably these meetings aren't worth our time. That's the meeting debt that a meeting doomsday aims to eliminate.
Excellent. All right. And what about this notion of collaboration cleanse?
So the collaboration cleanse is essentially a meeting doomsday applied to your communication system at large. So this was a cleanse I did with a group of employees at Asana and Amazon, where we essentially asked them to stop using half of their collaboration tools for a period of 2 weeks. And what was fascinating about this study is there was good news and there was bad news. The good news was we saw just after that 2-week period, more than half of employees said that moving forward, they could eliminate one or more communication tools from their tech stack or collaboration tools so they could develop a leaner communication stack. The bad news was we measured something that my colleague Paul Leonardi calls digital exhaustion. We spoke about that. And we saw a digital exhaustion increase through the study. And once we started to dig into the surveys, do some interviews, we realized what was happening, and that is people wanted to do more. Now that they had to more consciously think about their communication tools, their collaboration tools, they had to log every time they deviated from their approved tech stack. They realized there was a solution in terms of using fewer communication tools. But they realized that they alone could not make that determination. So much of how we collaborate and communicate necessarily involves other people. They were needing leaders to step in. And so that realization that there was now a solution, but they alone could not solve it, was both enlightening and exhausting. And I think that the takeaway from the cleanse is the importance of standardizing. Employees want standardization in terms of what is a meeting for, what is Slack for, what is email for, what is Dropbox for, all of these tools in a way that enables them to reduce this sort of toggle tax, as it's sometimes called, jumping from app to app to app through the day.
Right. So this comes back to something you have preached from the very beginning, which is being really clear, a standard. So if I am running a team for my team, a standard of why we're meeting, what deserves a meeting, how do we design a meeting, what are our rules for what kind of tools we use in what kind of places, and getting that clear. And to clarify it, I may need to do a collaboration cleanse or a meeting cancellation, a meeting doomsday, or any number of other tools, and step back and say, all right, what did we miss in doing that? But it's being intentional, starting with a clarity so everybody understands where, and then, of course, adapting with time. I have a feeling that an awful lot of people are going to listen to this and say, oh, please, can we do that? Please, please, can we do that? So do you have any last pieces of advice you think people need to be aware of as they go down this journey?
Do it. I think, there are always excuses that can be made. This is hard, doing a doomsday, carving out 48 hours, which is in the grand scheme of things is such a minimal time investment, but it's hard, right? It requires logistics. It requires, uncomfortable conversations. It's always worth it. If you're thinking about doing it intentionally, thinking about a collaboration cleanse, you'll learn something you would have never expected. And at the very minimum, it'll signal to your employees that you care about building a better communication and collaboration culture, and they'll show up in a different way.
I love it. Rebecca Hinds, my guest for today. Rebecca, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, where's the best place to find you?
So my website is RebeccaHinds.com. My book is on Amazon and all your favorite bookstores. And then I'm also on LinkedIn.
on LinkedIn. Okay. And the book is called Your Best Meeting Ever: 7 Principles for Designing Meetings That Get Things Done. I think we started at the top of this conversation to say that meetings can be fit for purpose. They can be time efficient, and they can be a joy. And I think you've got the tools to get people there. And my number one takeaway on this one is intentionality about the reason we need to meet in the first place. Status updates, brainstorming, information exchange are not deserving of a meeting. Use another channel. Okay, I love it. Rebecca, thanks for joining us today. What a great conversation.
Thanks so much, Wanda. It was fun.